My name's Emily Carter. I'm 27, and every year since I can remember, my birthday has been invisible. Not because I forgot, not because I expected too much, but because my family simply chose not to remember. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't the occasional slip of memory people are allowed when life gets busy. No, this was patterned neglect, an annual tradition of silence, as predictable as the weather in June. Meanwhile, my younger brother Ryan, 2 years behind me, but treated like he was light years ahead, has never known what it feels like to be overlooked. Every April, my parents transformed our house into a stage for his greatness. They pulled out the stops, balloons that filled the ceilings, banners stretched across the backyard, caterers serving food we couldn't normally afford, and relatives flown in just to watch him blow out candles. Each year brought a bigger spectacle, each year louder and more extravagant, like my parents were auditioning him for the role of family savior. And I was always there, standing off to the side, clapping politely while swallowing the ache in my throat. I learned how to smile when people asked, "So when's your birthday, Emily?" knowing full well the question would pass unanswered by my family. My own birthdays were a study in absence. June would come, and with it a hush. Sometimes my mom sent a text, usually 2 days late, the kind of message you send a coworker you barely know. "Happy day, sweetie. Hope it's good." Sometimes my dad mumbled something while half watching a football game, as though the words were too heavy to lift. And last year, they didn't bother at all. Not even a text. Not a call. Nothing. They were too wrapped up in Ryan's engagement party, planning menus, booking venues, gushing over his fiancée like she was royalty. I sat there that weekend, listening to their laughter echo through the phone as they group called me to brag about centerpieces, not once realizing they were talking to me on the very day I was born. It's not about the parties. People always assume that, like I wanted cake or gifts or a spotlight. That wasn't it. It was about what those celebrations meant. Recognition. Belonging. Proof that I mattered as much as he did. The balloons and speeches weren't decorations, they were symbols. And my lack of them wasn't silence, it was a verdict. What stung most wasn't the forgetting, it was the remembering of him. The choice, year after year, to invest energy, time, and money into my brother's life while draining me of visibility. Every toast to Ryan's bright future was a reminder that I was a shadow in their story, not a character. I could succeed quietly at work, keep my bills paid, stay out of trouble, and none of it would compare to the way Ryan's mediocre efforts were treated like miracles. When I was 22, I landed my first real job out of college. I called home to tell them the good news. Mom congratulated me, then immediately shifted to how Ryan was finding his path and how worried she was for him. When I published an article in a respected journal at 24, Dad didn't even read it. He just asked if Ryan had seen it because, he could learn from you. Even my victories were measured by how they could serve him. So when June rolled around each year and they forgot, I wasn't just disappointed. I was furious. Furious at their blindness, furious at myself for still caring. Furious because no matter how much I told myself birthdays didn't matter, a part of me still needed that small acknowledgement. I used to think anger was sharp, loud, explosive, but the anger I carried was quiet, dense, a stone lodged in my chest. It pressed down each June, growing heavier with every passing year. And though I never confronted them outright, I stored every slight like evidence in a case file I never meant to open. Until now. That's the cruelest part of being invisible. You don't even get the luxury of forgetting. They could forget my birthday 100 times, but I could never forget the silence. It clung to me, a reminder that in my family's story, Ryan was the headline and I was just the footnote. And if you've ever been a footnote in your own family, the rage doesn't fade. It compounds. And one day it demands release. This year was no different. Ryan's 25th birthday was an announcement more than an event. An assertion of value stamped in confetti and cliches. They rented a yacht. A yacht. My parents gleefully posted photos. Ryan laughing with a plastic crown stuck to his head. Dad with a drink in hand clapping like a man at the prow of his own success. Mom arranging a bouquet with the same care she never gave my school pictures. The feed filled with people I only half knew congratulating him on such a milestone, strangers liking the staged joy as if approval could be purchased by the hour. I watched the highlights scroll past on my phone during a slow workday and felt a slow animal inside my chest begin to circle. 2 weeks later, my birthday came and went the way a window goes unnoticed on a gray day, present but not seen. No party. No text until the next morning that read like an afterthought. Hope you had a good one. With 3 stars. No call. Ryan's stream of praise and public affection had been loud enough to wake the neighbors. My day barely registered as a blip on their radar. I told myself I shouldn't care. I had a steady job that left me proud, friends who gathered on Friday nights with good wine and better jokes, and in the background of adult responsibility, I'd earned a bonus at the tech firm that, for the first time, made me feel secure. Those should have been enough to buffer me from the sting. They weren't. I remember the apartment that night in precise detail because grief insists on mapping itself across the senses. The kitchen light hummed a thin hospital yellow. A mug I'd promised to throw away last month sat cold on the counter with a ring of coffee like a tiny, unblinking clock. My couch still smelled faintly of the lemon cleaner I used every Sunday to convince myself the place was under control. I sat with my phone on my knees and scrolled through my family's yacht photos until the images blurred into one continuous cut of laughter and champagne. Ryan's face filled the screen, grinning in slow motion. Someone had filmed his cake being cut and the camera lingered on his hands. Hands my mother had once held steady when she braided both of our hair, but which now seemed to belong to a different narrative entirely. I sat with that footage until my chest ached. The ache had texture, a tightness that pulled my diaphragm like a hand, a burning behind the sternum that made breathing deliberate. Tears came unexpectedly, sharp and honest, sliding hot and quick down my face. I cried not because I lacked things, but because I was tired of the pattern. I cried because recognition, even in the small form of a text or a voicemail, had become an index of love and they had chosen where to spend theirs. It was humiliation and sorrow braided together. Humiliated that I still longed for the stamp of their attention. Sorrow at how simple it would have been, how trivial to most people, to send a single note. I kept the tears private. I didn't call anyone. Not my friends, who would have wrapped me in practical kindness and made plans to remedy the oversight with bottles and bad food. Not my coworker Karen, who would have given me a pep talk over Slack. The privacy was deliberate. The thought of telling anyone else felt like admitting I'd allowed myself to be small under their gaze. So I let the loneliness collect its evidence in my apartment. A damp pillowcase where I rested my face, a half-eaten takeout container in the sink, my slippers shoved under the sofa as if I might never need them again. Memory is a traitor when you're hurt. It insists on lining up the inequities. I remembered how, at 10, I'd received a handmade card from Mom and a small chocolate bar, while Ryan's party the same year involved cousins, a rented magician, and a bar of presents that required alphabetizing. I remembered Dad's voice when I told him about a promotion. There was a beat, a polite smile, then questions about Ryan's apartment deposit. I cataloged these moments the way a lawyer catalogs evidence: dates, reactions, omissions. Each small neglect stacked until the structure of favoritism was undeniable, not just a feeling but a pattern. The pain is not only historical, it's explanatory. When I sifted through my anger between sobs and silence, I began to see the reasons that shaped them. Mom loves spectacle because it fills a hollow she can't name. She thrills at being needed in the grand gestures, at the attention that comes from orchestrating other people's joy. Dad, who grew up in a household where sons were trophies and daughters were background noise, measures affection by investment, time, money, public praise. Ryan, smoothed by their indulgence, offers charm where depth might be required and expects praise because it has always been forthcoming. None of those truths excuse the way I was made to feel invisible, but they turned the cruelty into something human, flawed, defensive people doing what they'd learned to do to feel significant or safe. That night I listened to myself breathe in the little apartment, and the realization that followed was not triumphant. It was simply a cold, clear assessment. I could not make them be different. The reasons that blinded them were woven into their histories. They were not deliberate malice so much as habitual blindness. Knowing that didn't soften the hurt, but it shifted the frame. If I could not force them to alter their gaze, perhaps I could decide how much of my life I folded under it. The thought arrived like a small, practical warmth in the center of my chest, first an ember, then something that might be coaxed into fire. I lay awake for hours, counting the things that were mine that no one could take: the integrity in my work, friends who accepted me without performances, the steady paycheck that meant apartments and freedom, the quiet competence with which I managed my days. These were not consolation prizes. They were evidence of a life that existed beyond my family's definitions. Pain had sharpened my awareness of what was missing, but it had also clarified what was not missing, what I had built without fanfare or permission. Perhaps, I thought before drifting into a restless sleep, recognition could come from my own hands. The very next weekend, I packed a bag and drove 2 hours north, leaving the city's smog and clamor behind. The interstate gave way to winding country roads flanked by pine forests, the scent of sap sharp and intoxicating in the warm June air. I had been to this lakeside community once, years ago, on a work retreat, but this time I wasn't there for deadlines or team-building exercises. I was there for myself. The lake emerged gradually, a glittering ribbon threading through the trees, catching the sun so that it looked less like water and more like liquid silver. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt a peculiar weight lift from my chest. Light, air in my lungs, possibility. I called a local realtor on a whim, her voice bright and professional over the phone, and she agreed to meet me that morning. I toured 3 homes, each with its own charm and flaws, one with a crooked roofline and a fireplace that smelled faintly of smoke, another with a view obstructed by overgrown birches, and a third with a kitchen that would have been perfect if I were 5 feet taller. And then, as we drove up a narrow lane lined with wildflowers bending in the breeze, I saw it. A small cedar-shingled house perched at the edge of the water, its porch stretching like an arm toward the lake. Wide windows framed the horizon, catching the sunlight in golden rectangles across the floor. The porch rail was low, and the swing hung ready for someone to sit and watch the water ripple under a summer sky. I don't think I even looked at the inside at first. I inhaled the scent of cedar and damp earth, and in that instant, it was mine. The realtor led me inside, and everything clicked. The kitchen was modest, but sunlight spilled across pale countertops and gleamed off a brass faucet. A living room with windows from floor to ceiling framed the lake as if it were a painting. The floorboards creaked pleasantly under my bare feet, as though welcoming me home. I walked out onto the porch, and the lake lapped quietly beneath, the surface so still it reflected the clouds perfectly. I leaned against the railing, closed my eyes, and imagined mornings spent with coffee in one hand, a notebook in the other, the sun rising across the water while nothing demanded my attention except the slow passage of time. I made an offer that afternoon. My bonus, sizable, earned with years of long nights coding, hitching, and problem-solving, covered the down payment. Sitting in a dimly lit office filled with stacks of paperwork, I signed the forms with a pen that felt heavier than usual, as though carrying the weight of all the ignored birthdays and small humiliations I had endured. Each signature, each initial, was a quiet rebellion against the narrative my family had written for me. At long last, I was authoring my own story, a story in which I was visible, in which I mattered, in which celebration was self-directed and not contingent on anyone else's approval. The process was surreal. Part of me half expected someone to knock on the door of reality and tell me I had imagined it all. But the documents were real, the keychain embossed with the Cedar House's address was real. And when I held it in my palm, the weight was solid and undeniable. The day I received the keys, I parked in front of the house and stepped out as if entering a dream. The air was warm, tinged with pine and the faint tang of the lake. I removed my shoes and let my bare feet sink into the soft grass leading to the dock. The wooden boards were warm from the sun, and I ran my hands over the rail, tracing the grain that had been formed long before I was born, long before any family obligation had dictated the value of a person. I moved through the house, snapping photos of everything, the swing swaying slightly in a breeze that hadn't yet touched the water, the sunlight falling in perfect triangles across the kitchen floor, the gentle curve of the shoreline outside the bedroom window. Each frame captured more than space. It captured a sense of reclamation. Finally, I sat on the porch, legs crossed, phone in hand. I scrolled through the photos, selecting a few, and then I typed a single line for Instagram for the world, or at least for myself, to see. Birthday gift, to myself. It was a statement that felt radical in its simplicity, no apology, no explanation, no need for validation, just a recognition that I was allowed to celebrate, to honor myself, to mark the day I was born in the way I wanted. I posted it, and the small ping of notifications that followed was a minor note, inconsequential compared to the quiet triumph I felt as I watched the lake shimmer beneath the late afternoon sun. For the first time, I realized hope didn't arrive in grand declarations from others. It didn't come in balloons or yachts or applause. It arrived in small, deliberate acts of self-affirmation, in claiming space, in writing myself into my own story. The cedar house, the dock, the sunlight spilling through the wide windows, they were tangible proof that I could create moments of joy, moments of recognition, moments of life that were mine and mine alone. As I rocked gently in the porch swing, the water mirroring the clouds and sky above, I felt a quiet certainty settle over me. Life could still surprise me. Life could still reward me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt as though I was exactly where I was supposed to be, seen, valued, and finally, hopeful. I didn't expect the storm that followed, not in the slightest. It began subtly, a faint vibration against the wooden countertop where my phone rested. By the time I realized it, the notifications were a rapid-fire symphony, each ping making my pulse quicken. The first was from Mom. "Emily, what on earth is this? You bought a house without telling us." Her text, dripping with incredulity, made me pause. I read it twice, searching for punctuation that might indicate sarcasm or an emoji that would soften the blow. Nothing. Just raw, pure shock. A lifetime of ignoring my milestones condensed into 3 lines of reprimand. Then came Ryan. I knew it would be him. "Wow, dramatic much. You think buying a cabin makes up for being bitter all the time." Bitter. That was the word he chose. Not happy for herself. Not finally taking control. Bitter. I felt a heat rise in my chest, a mixture of disbelief and the thrill of righteous anger. He had spent 25 years basking in the spotlight, paraded as the family success story, while my birthdays became footnotes. And now the audacity of celebrating myself, of giving myself what they never had, was apparently scandalous. Even Dad, the man whose silence had been my constant companion through countless neglected birthdays, chimed in. "Why didn't you consult us before making such a big decision? Families discuss things like this." I blinked at the screen. I read the message again, slowly, let it sink in. They had ignored, minimized, and sometimes forgotten the day I was born, yet here they were, full of indignation, questioning my judgment for daring to claim my own joy. The audacity of it struck me with a clarity that left me momentarily speechless. I held the phone loosely in my hand, staring at the water outside my lake house window, sunlight scattering across the surface like shards of gold. For the first time, the magnitude of my own agency felt both exhilarating and terrifying. I opened the family group chat. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to retract, to appease, to say something conciliatory and soothing. But another part, something fiercer, sharper, refused to be silenced. And so I typed, "Every year you forget my birthday while throwing parties for Ryan. This time I decided not to wait for you to care. I gave myself the gift you never did. Recognition." Send. Silence. For a long moment, nothing. The cursor blinked against the dark background of the chat window like a metronome measuring time that had been stolen from me for decades. Then Dad tried. "That's not fair, Em." Before I could respond, another notification cut through, unfamiliar and decisive. Ryan's girlfriend, a sharp and observant woman I'd always liked, had weighed in. "Actually, she's right. You guys never celebrate her. I've noticed." The words landed like a hammer. The silence that followed was deafening, heavier than anything I had felt in years. My chest rose and fell as I absorbed the gravity of the moment. Here was acknowledgement, not from the people who had ignored me, but from someone impartial, someone who could see the pattern I had endured silently for so long. And in that recognition, I felt an unexpected, surging sense of triumph. It wasn't about proving them wrong, though it certainly did that. It wasn't about asserting superiority, though. In a practical sense, I had done exactly that by turning my bonus into something tangible. Something permanent, something that existed because of my own effort. No, it was about claiming a reality they had never offered me. The reality in which I mattered, the reality in which my milestones were valid, the reality in which I could honor myself without waiting for validation from anyone else. I sat back in the porch swing, letting the late afternoon sun burn warm on my arms. I reread my own message. Every word felt deliberate, precise, an incision into years of invisibility. My fingers brushed against the phone screen, but I no longer needed it to anchor me to reality. The key in my pocket did that. The smell of cedar did that. The gentle lapping of the lake against the dock did that. The house, small and imperfect, was a monument to my own agency, a tangible, unassailable testament to my worth. The storm on the phone eventually subsided. Messages slowed, notifications dimmed, but inside me something irreversible had shifted. The old pattern, being overlooked, discounted, ignored, no longer held dominion. I had acted, decisively and unapologetically, and in doing so I had carved out a space that was mine. Not borrowed, not contingent on family approval, not dependent on anyone else's agenda. Mine. For the first time, I understood what triumph felt like when it wasn't performative or superficial. It was quiet but undeniable, fierce but rooted in self-respect. It was the feeling of turning neglect into empowerment, invisibility into a home, and years of quiet pain into a declaration of worth. I leaned back, eyes on the horizon where water and sky met in an unbroken line. I was Emily Carter, 27, and for the first time, the center of my own life. Not because anyone else said so, but because I had decided it was so. And in that decision, I discovered something astonishing. Hope, resilience, and triumph were not gifts anyone could give me. They were mine to take. I didn't stay much longer that night. I left the half-eaten roast on my plate, untouched by the tension that had thickened the air at the table, and stepped outside into the crisp evening, letting the chill bite at my cheeks. The sky was a deep indigo, dotted with stars that seemed sharper than usual, as if the universe itself had sharpened its focus on me. Each breath I drew felt electric, alive, full of a freedom I hadn't known I was capable of feeling. For years I had carried their shame, their disappointment, their unspoken judgments as if they were my own burden to bear. Every slight, every ignored birthday, every casual dismissal had layered over me like a weight I accepted as inevitable. But tonight the air felt different. Tonight the burden didn't settle on my shoulders. It hovered, then dissipated, like smoke carried away by a gentle wind. I thought about the years I had spent internalizing their narrative, the one in which I was always the failure, the one where Ryan's successes were the measure by which I was judged. I had been meticulous, careful, polite, constantly trying to prove myself in invisible ways. Paying bills I wasn't required to, covering for mistakes that weren't mine, quietly keeping the household afloat while my contributions went unnoticed. I had lived under the assumption that my value was conditional, that love and recognition were earned through service, sacrifice, and silent endurance. And yet, the irony wasn't lost on me. I have been the backbone all along, the silent stabilizer of a family that had never stopped to notice. The truth stung, a sharp pang of pain, but within that sting was clarity, like a lighthouse-piercing fog. I walked down the driveway, my shoes crunching against the gravel, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Ownership of my own narrative. I had spent decades waiting for validation that would never come, but now the recognition I craved had been claimed by none other than myself. I had given myself a gift that no one could take away, a gift not of objects, but of acknowledgement of self-worth. The house, the keys, the messages, they were all symbols, yes, but more than that, they were proof. Proof that I could act decisively, that I could claim what I deserved without waiting for anyone's permission. The act was radical in its simplicity. I had stopped waiting. I had stopped apologizing for wanting to be seen. The phone rang the next morning, Sierra. Her name on the screen felt like a lifeline. I answered, bracing for the voice I hadn't heard in years, expecting perhaps polite avoidance, distant small talk, or the empty reassurances of someone conditioned to placate family dramas. Instead, her voice was soft, tender, carrying an authenticity that disarmed me. "Emily." "I didn't know," she said. There was a pause, filled with hesitation, almost reverence. "I should have asked, I should have seen it. But I want you to know, I'm proud of you, more than Mom ever was." Her words struck me in the chest, and I felt the tension of years unraveling in one small but seismic moment. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to believe her. I didn't shrink from praise, didn't question the sincerity or measure it against imagined expectations. I absorbed it. Her pride was an acknowledgement of my truth, a recognition that I had survived, that I had carried, that I had persisted. It was not performative, not transactional, it was real. I thought about the money I had given over the years, the $61,000 that had kept the household afloat while I remained uncelebrated, undervalued. That sum represented more than finances. It represented years of labor, of loyalty, of unrecognized sacrifice. They might never repay it. They might never fully comprehend the cost, the emotional and financial weight I had borne. But the truth was out, luminous and undeniable. The illusion, the myth of my inadequacy, the carefully constructed family narrative that I was the failure, had been shattered. And with its collapse came liberation. I stood by the window, looking out over the lake, sunlight glinting off the water in a way that felt almost celebratory, and I realized I wasn't the failure anymore. I was the survivor. I was the one who held the family together when no one else noticed, the one who had quietly ensured stability while invisible hands of judgment pointed elsewhere. I was strong, resilient, and self-aware in a way that no party, no approval, no belated happy birthday could ever measure. I had stopped hiding my strength. I had claimed it. And that strength, that recognition of my own worth, was worth infinitely more than any dinner table approval, any perfunctory celebration. The air around me felt lighter, the weight of expectation lifted. I exhaled, letting it all go, the resentment, the hurt, the long years of quiet endurance. And in that exhale was a deep, abiding sense of triumph. I had survived. I had persisted. I had celebrated myself. And in doing so, I had discovered what no one could ever take from me, that I am seen, I am valuable, and I am enough. The horizon shimmered with sunlight on the water, and I realized with quiet certainty that this was only the beginning.